sometime in the past 2 years, the training cluster that was supposed to be impossible, thousands of Huawei Ascend chips running in lockstep on a workload that once demanded Nvidia's most capable data center accelerators, quietly became routine inside China's largest cloud providers. The bullish case lands first, and lands hard. Huawei has seized roughly half the Chinese artificial intelligence accelerator market, and Nvidia's dominance in the world's second-largest economy is, in this framing, functionally over. The skeptical case arrives a half step behind and hits just as hard. Capturing a captive market after your rival was banned is not the same as winning on merit, and the real cost of those training runs has never appeared in a public audit. The contested anchor running through every round of this analysis is not market share and not model performance. It is Huawei's Ascend chip yield, the fraction of wafers that exit fabrication as usable, saleable silicon. Yield is not a marketing figure. It is a manufacturing reality that determines whether Huawei's market position reflects genuine competitiveness or a subsidy-padded workaround dressed in nationalistic framing. Every round turns on it. The verdict will too. 3 questions adjudicate the contest: whether the market share number means what the bulls claim it means, whether domestic silicon independence and silicon efficiency are the same argument or 2 separate ones, and whether a large-scale training run that has never disclosed its energy cost constitutes proof of anything beyond the narrowest version of completion. The first round opens on the headline number. Multiple Chinese industry trackers and trade analysts have reported that Huawei Ascend accelerators have taken roughly half of the domestic artificial intelligence chip market, a share figure that, if accurate, represents a collapse of Nvidia's position in China faster than most analysts projected, even after the export restrictions progressively tightened. The structural argument for the bulls is almost frictionless. Nvidia cannot legally ship its most capable data center accelerators to Chinese buyers. Huawei can. Half the market, in this framing, is a rout by forfeit. The skeptics answer with a logic problem. A market built on exclusion is not the same as a market won on preference. When a procurement officer at a Chinese cloud provider chooses Ascend over an H100 class accelerator, the decision tree has one branch removed by law, not by the competing product's inadequacy. Share captured under those conditions tells you who is available. It does not tell you who is better. Nvidia still holds the performance benchmarks the global artificial intelligence industry measures against. Huawei holds the contracts. Those are different kinds of winning. The evidence in round 1 tilts toward the skeptics, but not conclusively. The roughly 50% share figure circulates through Chinese analyst reports and has been cited extensively in technology trade press. No third-party audit of actual shipment volumes has been published. Huawei does not break out Ascend unit sales in its public financials, so the number is a plausible and directionally credible estimate, not a confirmed shipment count. What is documented without ambiguity: Nvidia's export licensing situation has narrowed progressively, and Chinese cloud providers, Baidu, Alibaba, ByteDance, have all publicly acknowledged accelerating their domestic chip procurement. The directional shift is real and consequential. The precise magnitude of Huawei's share is an informed estimate, and those 2 things are meaningfully different when you are building a strategic case. Round 1 to the skeptics, narrowly. The share shift is real and structurally significant, but a headline number built on availability rather than verified shipment data, awarded in a market where the leading alternative is legally restricted, is not the same exhibit as share 1 in open competition. The bullish case needs independent shipment data before this round closes cleanly. What it has now is a compelling direction and an unaudited number. Round 2 is where the analysis gets harder and where the verdict will ultimately land. The bullish claim here is more ambitious than market share. Huawei designs its own Ascend architecture, fabricated at a domestic foundry on a domestic process node. The argument is that China has demonstrated it can produce competitive artificial intelligence accelerators without access to the leading-edge lithography tools that were supposed to be the definitive choke point. The chip exists. It runs inference workloads. It trains models. The supply chain that was supposed to be irreplaceable has been replaced, or at minimum bypassed. That is not a trivial achievement. The skeptics do not dispute the existence of the chip. They dispute the word competitive. Independence and efficiency are separate questions. and conflating them is where the bullish narrative does its heaviest rhetorical lifting. Chips produced on an older or less mature process node require more power and more physical silicon to execute the same number of floating point operations per second. If Huawei needs, and reports suggest this directionally, though the company has not confirmed precise ratios, a materially larger cluster and a meaningfully higher power draw to match a training run that a smaller Nvidia-based cluster would complete, then the cost of independence is being paid by someone. That someone, in China's artificial intelligence build-out, is largely the state and the subsidized cloud platforms absorbing the efficiency gap on behalf of the national strategy. The process gap between what China's domestic foundry capacity can produce and what the leading-edge foreign foundry produces for Nvidia is documented at a general level. Advanced extreme ultraviolet lithography tools are export-controlled out of China. The consequence, more transistors required per operation when the manufacturing process is less refined, follows from physics, not from policy preference. What is not publicly confirmed is the exact efficiency ratio between Ascend and H100 class chips at comparable training workloads, because no independent benchmark organization has run both chip families on a matched task with disclosed energy consumption and disclosed cost figures. Huawei's own claims about Ascend training performance exist and have been cited in product materials and public communications. Independent confirmation of those claims does not exist in any form that would satisfy a rigorous technical review. Consider the yield question specifically. Yield is the fraction of a fabricated wafer that produces functioning chips meeting specification. A lower yield means more wafers consumed per usable chip, which means higher cost per unit of compute delivered. Huawei's yield figures are not public. The domestic foundry's process maturity relative to leading-edge foundries is not a contested point. The gap is acknowledged. The degree of the gap is debated. If yield is substantially lower than what Nvidia's supply chain achieves, the per-unit cost of Huawei's compute is higher than the chip's listed price suggests, and the market share number conceals a cost structure that is only sustainable under subsidy conditions. Round 2 to the skeptics, more decisively than round 1. The independence claim is true in the narrow sense. The chip is real, the architecture is domestic, the supply chain is not dependent on restricted foreign components at the final fabrication stage. The efficiency claim is unverified and, based on the structural evidence available, probably optimistic. The yield and power penalty is a physical consequence of the process gap, and physical constraints do not respond to policy announcements or national strategy documents. Huawei wins the existence argument without contest. The cost per floating point operation argument remains open, and on available evidence, tilts against them. This is the decisive round, and it stays open precisely because the data required to close it has not been made public by any party. The dissent against this ruling is serious and must be weighed. 3 points bear directly on whether this verdict survives scrutiny. First, yield convergence is real and has historical precedent. Foundry operations that began with yields considered uncompetitive by the global standard have closed the gap faster than consensus projections assumed, in more than one documented case across the history of semiconductor manufacturing. China's domestic foundry trajectory is not predetermined. If fabrication yield improves materially over the next several years, the efficiency penalty shrinks, and the cost argument against Huawei weakens faster than the current skeptical framing assumes. A verdict based on today's yield data may be incorrect if rendered as a permanent structural ruling. Second, the absence of independent benchmark data cuts both ways. It is possible that the efficiency gap is smaller than the process node difference would suggest, that Huawei's chip architecture and software framework compensate for some of the silicon disadvantage in ways that are not visible from the outside. No external benchmark confirms a large gap. No external benchmark confirms a small gap. Ruling against Huawei on efficiency grounds while acknowledging that no independent measurement exists requires weighting a structural inference over the absence of measured evidence. That is a judgment call. It is a defensible one given the physics, but it is not a certainty, and an analyst who presents it as certainty has overread the available data. Third, energy cost in China's artificial intelligence build-out is not priced the same way it is priced in the United States or in Europe. If power is subsidized at the state or provincial level for designated strategic artificial intelligence clusters, and there is documented evidence of industrial power pricing arrangements in China that do not reflect market rates, then the efficiency penalty in kilowatt hours does not translate directly into a competitive disadvantage measured in yuan per training run. The cost gap may be real in engineering terms and effectively irrelevant in procurement terms if the electricity bill is not paid at anything close to market rates. The skeptical case about cost assumes that costs land somewhere. Under a subsidy regime, they may not land on the entity making the procurement decision. Those 3 points are load-bearing uncertainties, not rhetorical qualifications introduced for balance. Any one of them resolving favorably for Huawei would require revisiting this ruling. The verdict against the efficiency claim is sound under market rate assumptions with current yield data. It is provisional under the conditions that actually govern Chinese strategic industrial policy. Round 3 concerns the training run. Reports emerged, discussed in Chinese artificial intelligence community channels and referenced in Chinese technology press, of a large-scale training run executed entirely on domestic Ascend clusters, referred to in some accounts under project names, including LongCat. The bullish framing is that this run, at the scale described, proves the full stack. Chip, interconnect, the software framework that coordinates distributed training and training stability over a sustained period. If you can run a frontier-class training job to completion on domestically produced silicon, the capability gap is closed or credibly closing. Completion, in this argument, is the proof. The skeptics answer with a missing column. A training run proving completion is not the same as proving competitiveness, because the variable that distinguishes an efficient training run from an inefficient one is not whether the job finished. It is what the job cost. Nobody has publicly disclosed what that run cost in kilowatt hours. Nobody has disclosed the cluster size relative to what a comparable Nvidia-based cluster would require for the same model size and training duration. Without those two numbers, the run is a proof of existence, not a proof of efficiency. It confirms that the stack functions. It says nothing about what functioning cost. The evidence available is directional, but thin on specifics. Reports of large-scale domestic training runs on Ascend hardware have appeared across Chinese technology media and in executive communications from Chinese artificial intelligence labs. Independent verification of the run's parameters, model size, cluster size, training duration, energy consumption, has not been published in any form that would permit external reproduction or audit. The LongCat reference specifically discussed in Chinese artificial intelligence community channels, with parameters not publicly confirmed in technical literature with sufficient specificity to permit independent analysis. The company's claims about training performance exist and have been cited. No external benchmark organization has reproduced or audited the run at the parameters described. Split round, slight edge to the skeptics. The run almost certainly happened at meaningful scale. The directional claim is credible, and the reports are too consistent across independent sources to dismiss. But a benchmark with undisclosed energy cost is a benchmark with a missing column, and the missing column is exactly the one that determines whether the run was efficient or merely possible. The bullish side cannot close this round until the power figure is public. The skeptical side cannot call the run fraudulent without evidence of fraud, and no such evidence exists. The round stays open by design. That sustained ambiguity is itself an analytically significant result because it means the most visible proof offered for Huawei's capability claim is not fully interpretable by anyone outside the organizations that ran it. The verdict across all three rounds is not clean in either direction, and an honest ruling should reflect that. Huawei holds roughly half of China's artificial intelligence accelerator market. That is a real number with real consequences for Nvidia's revenue, for the structure of global artificial intelligence hardware supply chains, and for the strategic calculus of every government currently deciding how to regulate chip exports. The bullish case is correct on market share and correct on existence. The chip is real. The clusters are running. The training job's complete. The Ascend architecture is domestic in a meaningful sense, and the software stack that supports it has matured to the point where frontier-class training is at least possible. But the bullish case has not yet proven the hardest thing. It has not demonstrated that this dominance is cost competitive on an unsubsidized basis. It has not put yield convergence data on the table. It has not disclosed what the LongCat-scale run cost in power. On the evidence available, and the emphasis belongs on available because the withheld evidence is as analytically important as the published evidence. Huawei has won the market by winning the policy environment, The silicon question is still being graded. Export controls were designed to settle this contest permanently. They settled it in Huawei's favor on availability and left it completely open on efficiency. The restriction that was supposed to end China's artificial intelligence hardware ambitions handed Huawei a protected proving ground and a timeline. Whether the proof holds under market conditions, without the subsidy floor, and without the legal restriction that removed the preferred alternative, is the question the next several years will answer. That answer depends on a single number: yield. The fraction of wafers that exit fabrication as usable silicon is the variable that neither the company nor its critics have put on the table with independent verification. Until that number is public and audited, the dominant market position and the contested efficiency claim will coexist, and the verdict will remain provisional. Half the market, undisclosed cost. A lead measured in contracts, not yet in kilowatt-hours. Round 2 is where this verdict lives or dies. If you have independent data on the Ascend efficiency gap, a published benchmark, a technical analysis, an internal estimate that has made it into public channels, drop it in the comments, because that is the number that changes the ruling. And if this kind of forensic breakdown is what you want more of, claim, counterclaim, evidence, verdict, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next round is already filed.